To make sure that your MirageDrive 360 works efficiently and lasts a long time, you're going to want to perform the proper maintenance on it. And this is a combination of doing the adjustments, which there's another video just about the adjustments of the global adjuster and the idler cable, but also properly maintaining it by rinsing it off after use and in some cases lubricating it. So I want to talk about use and how to properly care for it. Now, depending on the circumstances, if you're using it in fresh water versus salt water is obviously a lot more corrosive and you're going to want to make sure you rinse it in fresh water after use. But also if you're using it in really grimy, sandy conditions, you're beaching the boat a lot, you're going to want to make sure that you thoroughly rinse the drive out after use. And this is just a question of making sure that you don't end up with sand packed in all of the moving components. And the best way to do that, if you're just at the shore, you could just take the drive by hand, dip it in the water, and just run the pedals back and forth. If there's a lot of sand in it and it's really sort of stuck up and bound up, if you left it on the beach and had the waves running over it, it would be good to loosen the global adjuster before doing that rinse. And what that does is it gives a little bit more room with the slack in the cables for the races and the bearings to all have room for that sand to pass through and exit the drive. So yeah, I would suggest rinsing the drive after each use if you have the opportunity, and then making sure if it is especially dirty that you clean all of that out. The lower unit of the drive has roller bearings in it, and they are not lubricated. This is an open system, so the water passes through these slits in the sprocket fairings and into the bearing races. And the reason that's done is because sand and salt water will find its way in anyway, so it's better to have it be an open system and allow it to flush through than to get it trapped in there. So for that same reason, though, you don't want to lubricate those bearings, because any lubricant or grease is going to attract sand and keep it there. So that doesn't allow it to rinse through. So that's basically called like a dry bearing system, but it's obviously wet, it's in the water, but dry meaning you don't need to lubricate it. You just need to rinse it off after use. From the factory, there is marine grease on a couple of points, and you'll want to keep those greased up. The main one is the idler cable. There's a couple of main spots where you could hear squeaking from the drive, and if it's squeaking, it's most likely out of the water. And so the two most common points are the idler cable and the pedals as they rotate on the pedal shafts. So for the idler cable, I would suggest like a marine grease, and I would just rub it on the cable in this area where it's passing in and out of the track on the drum as you pedal. So the squeaking comes from this, as this passes down against that edge of this shelf into the groove on the drum. Those parts, especially when this cable's under tension, can squeak. And just applying a little bit of marine grease will help. And I say marine grease rather than Hobie Lube or WD-40 because it sticks around a little longer, and it's used for high load applications, which this is sort of high load, slow speed. And it'll impregnate into the materials a little bit and help them to sort of wear in so they don't rub on each other as much. For lubricating the pedals, something like a lithium grease or a silicone grease is good, and you can hit it from either side. So you can see the pedal shaft right here, so you can spray a little bit on that side, and then you can also pop off this rubber cap and spray some in there. There's the riveted shaft and a washer, and you can just spray it in there and then move this around a little bit. So it's common to have a little bit of noise from the pedals after a while, especially as that all dries out, and it's common to have a little bit of noise here as well. Otherwise, the rest of the grease in this drive, the bearings here, the bearings in the internal pulleys, it's all good for the lifetime of the drive, so you shouldn't have to do any lubrication. The last point on the drive that you may want to lubricate if you're finding it's rough is the internal bearing ring system and the lower unit in the spots where it twists and rubs on the upper unit of the drive. So You could put some lithium or silicone grease between these two components, where this one, the lower unit, rotates inside of the spine fairing. You could put some lithium grease or silicone here between the support tube and this upper tube receiver. And you could do the same for these bearing rings on the inside. Through these gaps, you could spray a little bit of lubricant, but I would only suggest doing this if you're finding, you've got a lot of sand in the drive, and as you do this, it really grinds, or there's considerable friction. And obviously make sure you don't have too much tension on the global adjuster, because that can add friction. But if things are really sort of feeling like they're getting binded, or it sort of moves in a sort of like, segmented rather than a nice smooth rotation, it might be a good idea to spray a little bit on this. There's two bearing rings. There's an external, or there's an outer bearing ring and an inner one, both inside of this support tube. And so just spray some on there and give it a spin. Let it work into those bearings, and you'll probably see a big difference if it is binding up at all. Other than that, you shouldn't need to do any more greasing of the drive. And as I mentioned, don't try to lubricate the lower unit. It's not necessary.